so I'm not entirely comfortable publicizing this story. Only a few close friends of mine and my wife know about it. However, my wife has convinced me to send it to you in the hopes that you will share it on your YouTube channel. I'm going to leave my name and the names of those involved out of it to make sure they don't receive any kind of repercussions for me telling it. For the purposes of this story, the 3 friends who went with me that night will be called Matt, Tim, and Russell, and you can call me Jack. A couple of years ago, my 3 friends convinced me to explore a haunted house attraction with them. Now, haunted houses aren't really my thing. I don't particularly enjoy any type of horror films, scary media, or ghost stories, but they convinced me to go with them to watch the car while they went inside. There have been many reports of cars being broken into in that area, so they didn't want to take a chance. The haunted house that they were going to was advertised in some small local newspaper, so they thought it would be mildly popular and well done. The house would only be open on Halloween night and the night prior, so they decided it was best to beat the crowds and go on the first night, October 30th. The GPS said that the address was in the warehouse district of the city, so we all piled into Tim's car and drove 20 minutes to the south end of town and entered the warehouse district. The warehouse district is only called that because calling it the random fields with large storehouses isn't really efficient. But in reality, this place is full of large fields planted with cotton and corn, and the storehouses for the crops are located next to each field. We pulled up to the advertised address and were greeted by a large chain link fence with a large "No Trespassing" sign hanging off of it. Right above that was a cardboard sign that read, "Haunted House Ahead," and what looked like Sharpie marker. The open gate led into a large dirt parking lot next to a storehouse, an empty parking lot, and an empty storehouse. Tim looked at Russell and said, "Are you sure this is the right address?"
"Look at the sign, dummy,"
Russell replied and pointed to the cardboard sign.
"The address was on the paper, I put it into my phone, and Apple Maps never does me wrong."
Matt's voice broke in from the back seat. "Let's just go inside and ask. If we're at the wrong place, we can just leave and find out where we're supposed to go afterwards." Tim sighed in exasperation. "Okay, but if my car gets towed, you can pay for it." He then began to pull into the lot. As soon as the car stopped, Russell and Matt were out stretching. Being crammed into the small Honda CR-V was difficult for the 2 6-foot workout enthusiasts. Tim and I were a little smaller than them, so the car wasn't as bad on us. The first thing that struck me as odd was that an advertised haunted house would only have a cheap cardboard sign to show where it was. The second thing I noticed was the lack of cars or props outside of this so-called haunted house. I already didn't like these things, and this experience so far was cementing that feeling of distaste. "Well, you chose this one, Russell. Where are we supposed to go now?" Russell looked towards the storehouse.
"There's a door down at the end."
He pointed towards the far side of the parking lot, opposite the car.
"I think we're supposed to buy our tickets inside. Then there should be signs in there that tell us when it starts and ends."
He headed towards the door with Matt following behind. Tim looked at me with a grin. "Well, Jack, leave it up to Russell to find us the weirdest places. You should come with us to make sure it isn't abandoned. And if it's the right place, you can come back out here and watch the car." I looked at the storehouse and then back to the car. Sure, why not? It's not like there's anyone around to break into the car anyway." Tim and I made our way over to Russell and Matt, who were looking at the storehouse door. "Is it unlocked?" Tim asked.
"We haven't tried the door yet. We were waiting on you two,"
said Russell. "Well, here we are. Let's go do this," I said. Russell twisted the handle of the door and pulled it. It swung open easily, revealing a completely empty and bare storehouse floor. "Did they cancel it? Or is this just another one of your jokes?" Matt asked Russell before looking around at the vacant building.
"No, the ad said it started today at sunset, and that was an hour ago,"
Russell replied while looking at his watch. I glanced at mine, It read 8:12 p.m. "Look at the graffiti. Whoever did that has no imagination," Matt said, pointing at the closest wall. The paint on the wall was a drab brown and was without a pattern. It looked chaotic and clashing. It definitely didn't look professional or even gang-related. As we all looked at the rest of the walls, we gradually got further and further into the building. Soon we found ourselves close to the very center of a large open room that took up most of the structure. "Hey, look," said Tom, pointing to the corner furthest from the door we had entered through. It looked like a stand of some sort, like the kind that musicians use to hold their sheet music. We all walked over to it, glancing at the rest of the walls as we walked. Each one had more cryptic designs in that same brown paint. I made out some symbols, but most of them were so crudely drawn that it was impossible to tell if it was accidental or by design. However, it looked like they had been placed there on purpose. I thought I saw an Ankh key on the wall. Another symbol looked like a pentagram, and then I saw another one that looked like an upside-down cross. But strangely, no one else seemed to see the same things that I saw. Matt said that the pentagram looked like a table, and that the Ankh looked more like the letter T. Russell said that he didn't see any type of distinction to them, and Tim didn't seem to notice at all. Tim reached the stand first and picked something up that looked like a leather-bound book. He opened it and began to flip through the pages. "Huh? I can't read any of this. It looks like it's written in a weird language." He handed the book to me. It felt like leather, but more stretchy, like a sponge almost. I opened it and saw what Tim was talking about. I couldn't make heads or tails of any of it. It really did look like a foreign language. It reminded me of what I had seen in Russian writing, how some of the letters looked backward or upside down. I handed the book over to Russell. He opened it, and after a second, he looked at Tim and I with confusion.
"What do you mean it's not in English? I can read it just fine."
"What?" I exclaimed in astonishment.
"Yeah, it says..."
I'm not sure what happened next. I woke up in my apartment and bed, dressed in my pajamas. My phone was on its charger, and my roommate was in bed, asleep. I looked at my phone. The clock said it was 4:30 a.m. What the hell happened in the past 8 hours? There was no way I dreamt all of that. I quickly got up and stepped outside and saw that Tim's car was parked in front of his apartment. We lived in the same complex. I started calling all 3 of my friends and got no answers. Finally, at around 9 in the morning, I got a hold of Tim, and he said he was just as freaked out as I was. We got a hold of Russell and Matt later that day, and we all agreed to get together the day after Halloween to see what we could come up with. The day after Halloween, we all met up to see if we could remember what happened after Russell read from the book. Not a single one of us could. We agreed to go back to the storehouse later that day. When we did, there was nothing there. We double-checked Russell's GPS and the newspaper ad. We were at the right place. But the storehouse and the dirt parking lot were gone. After that, we agreed that we wouldn't bring it up to each other ever again, and to this day, I haven't talked to them about it since.
Let's go back in time to the late 2000s, circa 2007 to 2010. I wasn't even 10 years old, but I remember certain events very well. This happened in a small town. I won't disclose the name, but I will say it is named after a fish. The settlement used to be a coal mining town situated west of Pittsburgh. I've noticed that many horror stories occur in this general area. I guess it makes sense, as it is an old state. My hometown consisted of a few roads. I live on McVeigh Street. McVeigh Street has quite the history. Just down the road from my house is an old cemetery that leads up to an old Victorian home on top of the hill. On this same road, a young girl named Christine Gunther disappeared. Her body was later found in the grassy knolls outside the cemetery on October 31st, 1981. Local legend says when someone walks up the road in the dead of night, you can feel something grab your ankle from the grass. Another dark piece of history about McVeigh Street is that some people were hung from the trees alongside it during the Civil War. I've seen and experienced many things growing up in my hometown. One of the earliest occurrences was when my brother went downstairs one night to the kitchen when he saw what looked like a demonic clown standing in the kitchen. Keep in mind, this was long before the clown sightings of 2016. My brother pissed his pants, ran outside, and immediately called our mother, who thought he made the whole thing up. But I know my brother, and I could see the fear in his eyes. After that night, he refused to talk about it. As for my personal experience, I'll recount the minor incidents first. As a kid, I would pile blankets on top of me, thinking that it would stop something from attacking me when I slept. This started when I heard the kitchen drawers being dumped onto the floor in the kitchen. My mother would wake up and see the silverware spread out on the ground. My brother and I were blamed for it, of course. Another incident I recall was when my mother was downstairs with her then boyfriend. I couldn't sleep, so I opened my layer of blankets and saw a dark figure in black drapery. It had eggshell white skin and pitch black eyes. I threw the blanket back over me and didn't come out of my nest for the rest of that night. At the time, I dismissed the sightings as a night terror. This next event took place in 2010. I remember because it was the same year that The Walking Dead debuted on television, which fueled my fear of zombies. I had fallen asleep to some movie playing on my TV. I was woken by a growling sound, like a zombie. I jumped out of my chair and ran downstairs to see my mother watching some comedy show. I asked my mother if she heard a growling sound coming from my room, to which she said no. I didn't sleep that night. The final encounter was by far the scariest. I had gotten into trouble over something. I don't remember what exactly. It was late into the morning, probably around noon. My brother and I were the only ones home. He went upstairs to shower and told me to stay at the kitchen table where I was busy drawing pictures. After a while, I looked up and saw a man standing next to the fridge. His appearance was that of a rotting corpse. His arms and legs were covered in dirty bandages. His skin was green and decayed. The man turned his head towards me and let out an agonized moan. And I ran out of the kitchen towards the living room couch and hid under the cushions, where my brother found me hiding when he came back downstairs. I also would like to point out that we temporarily had a Himalayan cat named Emma. She wasn't the nicest cat, but she went into hiding that same day. When she finally returned, she was even more skittish than before. To put the cherry on top of everything, our neighbor asked my mother one day, very casually, "Have you seen the ghost yet?" For me, this confirmed that we weren't crazy, that what we experienced in my childhood home was all too real. And I can tell you that the people who lived on McVeigh Street all have a similar story.
Hello, my name is Kate. I have experienced many paranormal and unexplainable events throughout my life. I could tell enough stories to fill up an entire episode of your show, but I'll save those for another time. For those of you who are familiar with things like possession, oppression, and channeling spirits, this one is for you. This story took place around 2008, during the winter months. I was 16 years old back then. I had just gotten my first car, which I named Lucy. She was a 1999 VW drop-top cabrio, and she symbolized the ultimate freedom. So needless to say, I drove her around everywhere whenever I had the chance. The second house I grew up in was in the suburbs of my hometown. It was rather secluded, and there wasn't too many places for a 16-year-old girl to hang out. We usually drove around the fields or went for a hike in the mountains. There was a freight yard a couple of blocks from my house. A couple of friends and I would go down there late at night and climb on top of the boxcars and mess around, causing trouble. Sometimes we would even bring liquor bottles and get drunk. This place could be very creepy at night, and sometimes gave off a negative vibe. Nevertheless, this was our hangout spot. During one of our trips out there, my sister claimed that she saw a shadow darting around inside of one of the open boxcars at the very end of the line. We had heard stories about the ghost of a little girl that had died at the freight yard many years ago, but I was never able to confirm if it was true. As a side note, located nearby the freight yard is a truck stop. My parents told me that sometime during the 80s, a prostitute was found decapitated there. There's no telling what other things may have occurred there over the years. The point of me telling you this is that this area has had its share of trouble in its long history. But when I grew up there, the community turned around and became a nice suburban area with strip malls and shopping centers. There was a shortcut to the freight yard if we drove down the lane behind the strip mall and made a left. One night, my friend Ryan and I decided to go for a drive. We had no idea that this would be one of the scariest experiences of our lives. What happened that night made me question my sanity, faith, in the material world as I knew it. We sat there in my car outside the freight yard for maybe 20 minutes, just talking. Suddenly the windows began to fog up, and I saw little droplets shaping into something on the surface of the window. Thinking that it was some kind of optical illusion, I started tracing them with my finger to show Ryan. I thought it was fun at first, until I lifted my finger to see that I had traced the visage of a demonic face into the window. It had large horns with an elongated chin and a smile that sent chills down my spine. This shocked and terrified me. I began to get nervous. Ryan was completely oblivious to what was going on, as he was on the phone with a friend at the time. Then, it happened. I began to feel this strange sensation as my arms started twisting and bending in unnatural ways. A horrible raspy voice fell from my lips as I began to speak utter nonsense. All while this was happening, my vantage point changed from the driver's seat to the car ceiling. I was now looking down at myself and Ryan. I became paralyzed. Ryan was now consumed by terror and was screaming into the phone as he tried to get out of the car. Him freaking out must have brought me back, just enough to tell him that I was scared too, and to please not leave me here. As I regained control of my body, I became dazed. My vision was blurry, and I saw Ryan with his back pressed up against the passenger side door. A terrified look was on his face. Outside the car, something was standing by the window. It was a girl with long black hair, wearing a blue dress. If Ryan had turned his head even slightly, he would have seen her too. She was standing so close to the car that the condensation on the windows obscured her face. There was no way in hell that I would be able to calmly collect myself. I quickly turned over the car, floored it, and got us the fuck out of there. I have only ever gone back there once in the daytime with my nephew. You couldn't pay me $1 million to ever go back there at night. You never know what is lurking in the shadows. This event has inspired me to become a paranormal investigator. My curiosity about the spirit world and my fascination with the unexplained will be with me until the end of my days. I want everyone to know that if you plan to explore the things that go bump in the night, make it a top priority to always protect yourself before entering their territory.
There's always a reason to be afraid.